Paul Mill officer at U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, Germany. There he played a key role in operations in the Middle East, focusing on Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. He returned to the cockpit in 1999, joining the VF-14 Top Hatters as executive officer, where I knew him, and later commanding officer. During his leadership, the squadron earned numerous awards, including the Clifton Trophy as the Navy's top fighter squadron, the Battle Efficiency Award, and the Safety S Award. Under his command, the Top Hatters were among the first to conduct airstrikes on terrorist sites in Afghanistan following the tragic events of September 11, 2001. His leadership during the onset of the global war on terror left an indelible mark on both his squadron and the larger Navy community. After leading the squadron through its transition to the Super Hornet, he was selected for an executive fellowship with the Hoover Institute at Stanford, where he shared his vast knowledge and insight with the next generation of leaders. He completed his career as commanding officer of VX-9, the Navy's premier test and evaluation squadron. His career was a testament to his love of flying, his unwavering dedication to service, and his profound impact on all who worked with him. His sense of adventure, intellectual curiosity, and deep care for his fellow service members will forever be remembered by those lives he touched. He was a man of faith, and interestingly, in the last 2 years of his life, he earned a master's degree in Catholic theology from Franciscan University of Steubenville. He planned to retire from General Atomics and served as a chaplain. He attended St. Anne Catholic Church in Ridgecrest, California, and enjoyed serving meals and singing in the choir. Bruce will be remembered for his great sense of humor and his generous heart. He was a faithful son, wonderful brother, and a fun uncle to his nephews and nieces. His personal relationship with Jesus Christ took him through his last difficult journey with strength and confidence that he could trust his Lord with the outcome of his life. We will miss him dearly, but look forward to the day we will be reunited in heaven. Bruce is survived by his sisters Bobby, Rebecca, numerous nieces and nephews, and a lot of shipmates. So now I'm going to tell you about the little story I was telling you about. Puppy Effect. Under his steady hand, Fighter Squadron 14 embarked on what was meant to be a routine deployment aboard the USS Enterprise in April of 2001. But as we all know, history had different plans. This deployment, while routine at the beginning, was set to be special before anybody stepped foot on the ship. As it was, Fighter Squadron 14's final deployment with the F-14 Tomcat marked the end of an era. Once this mission was complete, the F-14 would be retired, and in its place, the squadron would transition to the F-18 Super Hornet. With both excitement and a bit of sadness at the loss of an aircraft that the squadron had known for so long, they were off. But just like every deployment under Puppy's leadership, his command was ready for any mission at any moment or any call to action. On September 8, 2001, the USS Enterprise departed the Arabian Gulf, bound for home with a scheduled port call in South Africa for the first time in about 40 years. Just days later, while still south of the Arabian Peninsula, those aboard the USS Enterprise watched in horror as the tragedy of 9/11 unfolded. In that moment, Commander Feck's calm, visionary leadership shone through. He made sure his squadron was prepared not just for what came next, but for whatever would follow. That readiness was tested when the call came. On the eve of the first strikes of Operation Enduring Freedom in early October, Puppy assembled his team. Monty Ash Ashleman, Marcel Opus Padilla, Art Cato de la Cruz. Their target, a surface-to-air missile site northeast of Kabul, nearly 1,200 miles from the USS Enterprise. 1,200 miles. That's at least 3 refuelings. It was a mission demanding precision, resilience, and courage, a nighttime operation deep into enemy territory, requiring multiple in-flight refuelings and flawless coordination with Allied formations. And at the time, we didn't have any other air bases that we could go to in Afghanistan. Commander Feck led his team with the same unshakable calm that had become his signature, guiding them through enemy fire and back home for a sunrise recovery on the USS Enterprise. That's leadership. That's courage. But Puppy's strength wasn't just in his command of the skies, it was in his command of the hearts of those who served under him. Those who served alongside him speak of his infectious laughter, his unshakable calm, and his belief that even in the most trying of times, there was room for joy and camaraderie. His unique ability to diffuse tension with humor and build trust through unyielding confidence made Fighter Squadron 14 not just a team, but a family. He understood that a leader's spirit resonates throughout the entire crew, and because of that, his squadron was not only ready, they were resilient. They were prepared for the worst and delivered the best. Commander Feck led his squadron with dignity, courage, and an unyielding commitment to our nation. He brought his entire team home, every single one of them. That is the mark of a leader who not only commands respect but inspires it. He embodied the warrior spirit, the never quit attitude, and the deep sense of duty that defines the very best of our armed forces in this country. Today, I'm proud to tell you just one of many stories of Bruce Puppyfect. And we honor him not just for what he did, but for how he did it, with courage, with conviction, and with a spirit that lifted up everyone around him. His legacy lives on in the hearts of those who served alongside him in the freedom that he so selflessly defended. Great American patriots like Commander Bruce Puppyfect will always ensure our nation is secure, and they will also ensure the next generation of great leaders are trained and ready to carry that responsibility forward to wherever the next calling may be. So fair winds and following seas, shipmate. And I'd like to add, as we debate these bills on the floor here, that this weekend is Memorial Day, where we remember those who have given their lives, that we may speak freely down here, that we may debate with our colleagues, hopefully in civil tone and purpose, but understanding that this is the last great hope on earth, and that with friends like my friend from Arizona, we will make it even a better place to live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my friend from Texas. You always have some amazing stories. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, tonight is going to be a little tricky because I'm going to try to weave sort of three major subjects together. And some of it's going to be really technical. Some of it will be slightly sarcastic. But the math here is really important. So, and I'm going to do it backwards from how I originally thought, because I want to hit a couple things that are remarkably important. All right, so I've come behind this microphone, heaven knows how many times, and shown the charts, hey, we're borrowing, $72,000 a second, that we could borrow as much as $2.3 trillion this year, that, and I'm going to show some other things in here, Moody's, and, why did they downgrade us, that, what some of the things going on. And on occasion I get this of, okay, what are your solutions? And then we always try to come in saying, okay, here's the technology shoot where you could disrupt the cost of healthcare. Here's the technology where you could change the price of delivering government services. But we started almost a year ago in my capacity on Ways and Means, chairing the oversight. I now chair the Joint Economic Committee, so, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, because he helped me actually have the capacity. I've hired a PhD in healthcare economics. We've dropped last week, and that's the term we put in, something called a hopper. That's actually where you file your piece of legislation. Two pieces of legislation that the preliminary scores are almost $2 trillion in savings over 10 years. So as we're having this discussion of debt deficit, can you extend the tax policy? Can you do other things? It's not going to come from traditional austerity. The fact of the matter is that math doesn't work. You're going to do it through policy. You're going to fix policy. And people just stare at you like you're an idiot when you try to explain these things. So let's walk through our big one. And look, this is an occasion where I promise you, there's so much money involved. There's a reason other members of Congress have been unwilling to do what we knew was a problem. A few weeks ago, I came here with the MedPAC reports. Now, I don't know if anyone ever bothers to read them, but you go through there and it should light your hair on fire. For the last year, the Wall Street Journal has done a series of articles basically showing hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, misallocation, just misalignment incentives in something we call Medicare Advantage. So walk with me through. In the early 2000s, there was this concept of managed care, that if we could help our brothers and sisters with their earned benefit in Medicare, saying, look, we have fee-for-service, but you have to pay all these co-pays. But what would happen if you could align the incentives saying, we want insurers to manage a portfolio of access to health care, But within that, those insurers will actually make their money by helping you be healthier. The model, which started in 2005, many of you know it as Medicare Advantage. You see the ads, and that's actually part of the problem, was supposed to come in at 95% of fee-for-service, because this was a system where you were going to get better quality care, get taken care of, and the insurers would make their profit by helping their population become healthier. Well, it turns out, if you actually read those MedPAC reports, these are the auditors who do the modeling, and we're talking something it's almost $1 trillion in spending last year. So we're talking something it's stunning amounts of money. Last year, Medicare Advantage came in at 120% of fee-for-service. So just that delta, 120% to the 95 it was envisioned to be, that right there is $100 billion a year. And the fact of the matter is, if you've been following this series of articles, I think ProPublica, Wall Street Journal has spent tremendous resources doing it, it will curl your hair. And then you've been seeing the most recent stories about the potential criminal acts. I think last Thursday a story broke of actual criminal, not civil, criminal coming. So is it time for us as members of Congress to talk about something which is often dangerous, because when you're taking on a system that has trillions of dollars flowing through it, you got to understand, there will be ads in my district that are going to beat the ever-living crap out of me. It's the job. You got to tell the truth, know the math, and come with actual solutions. So we went back and said, hey, how do you design a system where you make sure the benefits, the promises are there for seniors because it's an earned benefit? How do you make sure you're doing nothing to cut that access to health care, to cut that access to quality health care, but you align the incentives to go back to the original vision where it's about helping those seniors who are on Medicare Advantage become healthier, and the morality of that. Now, we had to do a number of things in design, so we introduced legislation. This was the preliminary score from the Joint Economic Economists. $1.76 trillion of savings over the 10 years. Now, the fact of the matter, that's only about 10% of the cost of the program over those 10 years. So you start to understand the scale of the cost of this. We believe, now understand, this is only conversation between economists, and I was not on the call, that the preliminary score right now is $1.84 trillion coming from the people that will score the legislation. That would make it probably, everything we can guess, the single biggest reduction in spending in a single bill in probably U.S. history. Does that give you a sense, when you have people talking about waste and fraud and misalignment and bad acts, this is the ginormous granddaddy of it all. So how do you actually take a piece of legislation it's not that big a bill. It's a little complex. It's really scary because, as you know, around here, we're not ever supposed to talk about, these things that, particularly Medicare, but this is not Medicare as you think about it. This is the insurers who are paid to actually manage your care and help you be healthier. And yet you have the series of stories saying on how they've been taking advantage of the system. And there's a way to make this work. Even the MedPAC report says, we support Medicare Advantage. We want it to stay, but we're going to have to fix these misalignments. And the economists have been modeling the savings. So what happens if you have a moment here where these sorts of dollars in savings, and this is going to tie in, Mr. Speaker, to talking about what Moody's did last week, talking about how this and our talent-based immigration bill, those two bills together, probably score $2 trillion of savings. And they would be good for the economy. They would be good for healthcare. They'd be good for people to be healthier. They would help grow the economy. This is an example of getting policy right to actually take on a small sliver of the debt. Because remember, our baseline debt for the next 10 years, we're going to borrow another $22 trillion. So even though this number is massive, still just a fraction of what's coming at us. And look, I'm trying to make the point again. Our legislation, which we call Better Medicare, it's been introduced. It's in the process of being scored. But when you start to see these sorts of dollars, and yes, it would change the current spending projection by about 10.7%, according to the Joint Economic Economists. But you already had the MedPAC saying it's already 25% more expensive than was the original model. So it gives you a sense that we're making reforms, but we're just trying to align the incentives. And we've done some things to actually help the insurers be able to have sort of automatic enrollment, but you can choose to opt out. A longer period of time, so the investment for that senior who chooses that Medicare Advantage plan to be given the services to be healthier. But also with that healthier, the provider, may benefits by having a healthier population. We've been trying to just think like economists instead of so often what you hear behind these microphones. Because something I've teased about, I actually talked about this a couple weeks ago. There's in Nature Human Behavior, there was an academic article, and this is one of those geeky ones that's peer-reviewed, all those things. Computation analysis of U.S. congressional speeches reveals a shift from evidence to intuition. They basically took 240 years of House floor speeches, ran AI across them, and said, hey, guess what's happened? These speeches around here no longer talk about facts, about data, about math. We now tell our feelings. The problem is if you have complex problems, your feelings aren't going to help us fix complex problems. It turns out math does. And this is what we've been trying to do on this reform of Medicare Advantage. We want the system to work, but we can't allow $1.75 trillion over 10 years of fraud and bad acts. And if you don't believe me, get in front of your computer right now and look up some of the articles of the potential indictments, the criminal activities that are coming. But even the Wall Street Journal series that actually talks about people being scored as sicker, and they don't have the diseases, they don't receive services, they're not on those medications, but yet you and I as taxpayers are paying for it, and we're borrowing the money to do it. Please, if you're a staffer watching this, if you're an American that actually cares about us getting our act together and doing things better, if you're a member of Congress, look, I know doing big things around here is terrifying. We don't have a choice anymore. When you start to see, if anyone actually read the Moody's report that was put out last Thursday, they make a couple points that should scare the crap out of us. In 9 budget years, they believe about 9% of the entire economy in that year will be borrowed by the federal government. That's $3.8 trillion will be the borrowing amount in 2035. And that's just sort of our baseline. And the reason we often don't tell the truth, we avoid it, is almost all this growth of this borrowing is interest and Medicare. It turns out it's really not Republican or Democrat, it's demographics. But we're so busy trying to get elected next time, we need something to blame them, they want to blame us. So if you stand up here and try to actually fix problems, you will get the crap kicked out of you, but you're at least trying to do the right thing. This is what you're hired to do on this job. Is not pander to your voters, tell them the truth and try to fix things. I can't tell you how many speeches I hear behind these microphones. People tell you the problem over and over, but they'll never spend a year writing a bill, putting about 100 hours into it with academics, with PhDs in healthcare, experts from the industry, put together a bill and says, this will work. This will make things better. And look, here's something it should just a philosophical thought I want everyone to think about. The United States just got downgraded by the third major credit rating agency. Did you know there's 18 states that have higher credit rating than the United States government right now? 18 states have higher credit rating. Yet, every dime a member of Congress will vote on, every dime of discretionary, non-defense discretionary as we call it, is borrowed money. Every dime of defense is borrowed money. About $400 billion, I believe, last year, what we call mandatory spending, the formulaic, earned benefits, things of that nature, is borrowed money. Last year, for every dollar we took in tax receipts, we spent $1.39. And much of that money we're sending to states. Remember, we're borrowing money. So my state of Arizona, and we do some things actually really well. Our Medicaid system, we call Access, is actually remarkably well run. Except for some of the fraud, but I'm going to touch on that we haven't built the models to catch faster because we're not actually incentivized. Now, we also play incredible games where we use a provider tax. We actually make money for the general fund, more than is actually spent on health care, which is one of the great scams we're trying to fix right now, is what happens when the washing machine is actually a way where you're padding state budgets instead of taking care of health care. But that will get protests with. So think of this, 18 states that we borrow money have higher credit ratings than we do. It's just an interesting thought experiment. How about if I told you that I think it is, as of yesterday, it's either 12 or 13 countries can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States. Greece today can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States. If any of you are paying attention, remember, there's this concept of interest fragility. One of our greatest threats to this country is our ability to finance this debt. Today, both the 20-year and 30-year bond both either went over or touched 5%. We showed actually a couple months ago that a single point of interest on U.S. debt over 10 years came in like $3.3 trillion of additional interest. So it's bigger. Just a small movement of interest rate is bigger than everything we're debating here. But we're not going to tell you that. A, because it would require math. B, it would require facts. And C, it might actually mean someone has to do something. So there is an economist at Bloomberg, Anna Wong, truly freaky smart. I've had the opportunity and the honor. She came and spent a part of a day with my joint economic economist. She's been at the Federal Reserve. She's been at the White House. One of those people is just intimidating on how she's able to calculate the world. And she actually was looking at our reconciliation budget. And she says if we will do just a couple policy things, it's neutral in cost. It balances out. That's the point I'm standing here for. We cannot allow the taxes to go up on working people in this country. Well, right there, that's $3 trillion, $3.1 trillion. How are we going to offset it? Well, it turns out, if you take a look at, and this is just from Anna Wong's analysis, and if you're really geeky, you can get this on your Bloomberg terminal. So all 6 people in Washington have a Bloomberg terminal. They're really expensive, but I actually need it for what we do. If the tariffs, what they're producing, some of the DOGE offsets, turns out if we will incorporate some of this policy, we can make this budget neutral. And that's actually part of my request often for the leadership, for the committee chairs, for those of us in Ways and Means. We need to start actually pulling out our calculators and thinking this through. How do we do these things so we can stabilize the economy, maximize economic growth, but not be adding to the debt? There is math that does it. Will anyone actually read the documents? And we actually start to walk through this. So we're actually trying to build models right now on trying to see what's coming in custom duties. That's the tariffs. What is that offsetting? And we're trying, and you'll see me over the coming weeks come with charts and start saying, okay, here's what we have to plug into our models. But for everyone who's been whining around here, here's your math problem. And I would wish they would start the whining with telling the truth on math and facts before telling anecdotes and stories. Because remember, I just pointed out to you the 140 years analysts of these speeches here in Congress, how they've become now about feelings instead of facts, because we can manipulate you with telling anecdotal stories. This simple chart here, see the nice coins? We stole this from someone else. Baseline is we're going to spend $86 trillion over the next 10 years. All we're talking about trying to save is $2 trillion out of that 86. You're telling me we can't get $2 trillion out of 86 over 10 years. This is causing the emotional meltdown here because this place only cares about one thing, it's the money. Spend it, spend it, spend it, and basically screw over people's retirement and my kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 9-year-old. When my 2-year-old, yes, I know, my wife and I adopted some kids. It's the greatest thing we ever did. But when my 2.5-year-old is basically 23, 24, every single tax in America has to be doubled to maintain baseline spending. And I've done presentation after presentation where I've come here with the actual charts using Democrat economists showing that every tax hike the Democrats have proposed on the wealthy, everyone, capital gains, income, all the entire plethora produces about 1.5% of GDP. All the austerity, the cuts on our side, accounts for 1% of GDP. So you got a big 2.5%. Mr. Speaker, we're going to borrow about 7.3% of the economy this year. And I showed you a chart a little while ago that Moody's has us in 9 budget years borrowing 9% of the economy. Anyone see a math problem? The rhetoric here, the moving of the mouth, doesn't match what's on the calculator. We make crap up. This is the baseline fact. Baseline, we're set to spend $86 trillion over the next 10 years, and all we're trying to do is reduce $2 trillion. Now, I think we should reduce dramatically more, but I think you can do it through policy, the adoption of technology, the alignment of incentives, and actually make the delivery of government services work. When only 31% of the phone calls at the IRS get answered, are we doing our job? You do realize there's technology that would fix that. But that would actually turn and anger the union of the government employees there. So there's these barriers here where you have armies of lobbyists walking up down these hallways, and the inefficiency, that waste and fraud, is their profit model. Understand 80% of the spending growth. We're not supposed to tell people this, but it's the math. And you can't do policy unless you're willing to tell the truth of math. 80% of the spending growth over the next decade. Social Security, Medicare, interest. And the interest is now scaring the crap out of us. Because there's this concept called term premium. As the Ray Dilios and these people who are the billionaire experts start saying, hey, China's in the market, Germany's in the market, United States is binging on debt. There's almost not enough savings in the world to finance the scale of borrowing, and much of that borrowing is driven because of demographics. The entire industrialized world got old. We have a shortage of young people. I think the math is in 9 budget years, 23% of America is 65 and up. So are we doing the things to maximize automation and growth so we can have productivity, so we can continue to afford and provide the very services we promised? No, that would require math and thinking and policy. It's not good storytelling, is it, Mr. Speaker? Look, it's also one of the reasons I was so enraged on the intellectual lazy I thought that the Senate, and look, this is where I'm being a bit sarcastic, if not mean, at least the House, and it's not perfect, there's a number of things I'm unhappy with, and leadership still doesn't have my vote on it until I get some agreements that we're able to move policy to start changing some of these numbers. But I've shown up with the policy. I'm not just moving my mouth. We put it on paper, we introduced them as bills. But you look at the charts of what the Senate unwillingness to actually put policy into their budget reconciliation. And the reason we have to demonstrate a level of fiscal discipline, if you care about poor people, if you care about economic growth, if you care about my kids, if you care about your retirement, if you care about what this government provides to society, at some point we got to figure out how to pay for it. But what happens when interest? CBO says when we finish this fiscal year, U.S. debt will be at $37.2 trillion. We have to take to market this year in just refinancing, and I'm not counting the short roll on the short end of the curve if you want to geek out. I think we're going to bring $9 trillion to market. We're probably going to bring another $2.3 trillion of new issuances and start to see where the United States is interest rate-wise. We start seeing Greece and other countries having substantially lower interest rates than us. That should set off an alarm. Do you want the money to go to the world's bond markets? You do realize convincing the world debt markets that we're creditworthy, that we're being disciplined, that we're doing things, just that differential is more money than everything that's being debated here. How many people, when just 1 point of interest, 1 point differential here is over $3 trillion, that would solve a lot of this debate, wouldn't it? We can actually get those types of bond rates if we demonstrate to the world we're creditworthy, we're being disciplined, we're being sensible, we see our long term, and we're actually understanding the honesty of our demographics. But instead, a bunch of the brain trust here in Washington spends their time attacking Moody's for downgrading us and telling the truth. Problem is, if you actually read their document, it's the truth. And for everyone out there, it thinks balancing the budget and doing those things is simple. If you actually listen to folks from the last administration, this administration, the fantasy goal is just to get to 3% of debt to GDP, not 7%, not, heaven forbid, in 9 budget years being at 9%. But if you got 3%, you're more sustainable. But you got to stop the fantasy of saying, well, we're going to cut it all with a non-defense discretionary. Non-defense discretionary is 12% of our spending. Almost everything you think of as government, the Park Service, the FBI, the White House, our salaries here, that's in this 12%. Interest on the debt is every bit as big as all the non-defense discretionary. And actually, real interest on the debt, if you add up everything, is about $1.2 trillion this year. Because remember, when we borrow money from the trust funds, we got to pay it interest and pay it back. And then, for those who are willing to run around here and interested in having discussions on Medicaid, remember, Medicaid is the program that was designed for indigent populations, for women, children, infants. But yet, you hear almost protests from the left. So here's a $2.5 billion fraud in Medicaid in Arizona, where they exploited tribal members, abused them, recruited them off our tribal communities, put them in sober living homes, bled the system for money. It took years because in a system that has the incentive where you're doing provider taxes and more of that money with the raising the cost, and it ends up in the general fund of your state. We should be ashamed that these types of scams were allowed to bleed money that should have been going to people that needed the help. Look, if we don't get an alignment of policy, the cost, and how these things can actually work, Mr. Speaker, I think we're going to continue to live in this world where our debates mean nothing here. They're just based on feelings, exploitation of our voters, tell them things that are actually mathematically not true, but it's great politics. And right now, this place seems to give so much more about winning the next election than the survival of this republic and its economy, and its people and its prosperity. Is prosperity moral? There's a path where we can meet our obligations, help our brothers and sisters that need the help, and not scare the hell out of the very people that we turn to every single day, because this government borrows $9 billion a day. $72,000 a second. Next year, it's going to be close to $82,000 a second. In 9 years, it's approaching $100,000 a second. And so often, the discussion behind these microphones are things that set off your anger, and they're mathematical fantasies. If I get one more person that says, I saw on cable news this, why don't you fix it? And say, happy to fix it. But you do realize, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Okay, fine, if that's, I think that calculated to paying for 2 hours, 15 minutes of borrowing an entire year. The lack of understanding of the scale of this math. So, Mr. Speaker, there's hope. There's a way you can make this work. But not until the calculator's pulled out and the morality that prosperity is the goal, and it's the moral thing to do. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I apologize to anyone I hurt your feelings. Send me a note. I'll write you an apology note. That does seem, I seem to write a lot of apology notes. Look, I continue to be mad at both parties and almost everyone around here because we not willing to do the math. But there's a way you can make this work. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to submit extraneous material into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here as one of the co-chairs of the Doctors Caucus here in the House of Representatives. And I'm here to talk straight with you and with the American people and my constituents about this tax plan that is being worked on by my Republican colleagues that will explode the deficit, but that will also hurt every single person in this country by making the biggest cuts to Medicaid and to food benefits ever. And I want to make clear as I talk about this how reckless it is, and that even people who do not rely themselves on Medicaid will be impacted this. So I'm outraged. We're talking about a $715 billion cut to Medicaid. That is the largest cut ever. It will kick 13.7 million Americans off of their health insurance. And let's just be really clear about why they're doing this. This isn't to balance the budget. It's not to deal with the deficit. In fact, this bill is exploding the deficit. This is to pay for a gigantic tax break for the wealthiest people in this country, for example, Elon Musk. And to think about that transfer, taking health care away from the people in my district and across this country and transferring it to the wealthiest Americans, it is morally bankrupt, and it is also fiscally reckless. Because doing this will essentially collapse our healthcare system in the United States of America. That's why just last week we spent 26 and a half hours in the Energy and Commerce Committee discussing this very thing, telling the stories of our constituents, painting a picture of what it would mean to cut 13.7 million Americans off of their insurance. Now, you know, it's interesting that this whole discussion didn't start until 2 o'clock in the morning, because my Republican colleagues didn't want to have this discussion during the day when people would actually hear it. So they waited until the dead of night to bring up this topic of taking health care away from our constituents. Now, in the state of Washington, 1 out of 3 people rely on Medicaid. I'm going to tell you, most people who do, they don't even know it, because in Washington state, it is called Apple Health. So if you ask people if they're on Medicaid, they'll say no. If you ask them if they're on Apple Health, they will say yes. And this represents the most vulnerable people. These are kids, they're pregnant women, they're people with disabilities, they're the elderly in nursing homes. These are the people who need our help the most. So I think about my patients. I'm a pediatrician, and I think about the ones who have Apple Health. And if they didn't have that, if they didn't have access to come see me, their primary care pediatrician, and get diagnosed early with a mild pneumonia or an ear infection or whatever the case may be, they would be forced to go to the emergency department for that care. It's not like they're not going to get sick. They're going to get sicker, and they're going to go later when things are more expensive and more complicated. And you know what else? Even if you're not on Medicaid, so I think about my patients with private insurance, they're going to be waiting in that emergency department line too. They will have broken an arm, have some other emergency, and they're going to be waiting in a longer line. We all know that the lines are already long to be seen in the emergency department. The care there is the most expensive care you can get. The lines are the longest lines. And somebody's going to pay for that care. Otherwise, hospitals go underwater and they go out of business. And who is that? That's the people who are not on Medicaid, who are paying private insurance premiums, and those premiums are going to go up. It's going to hurt individuals who buy their own insurance. It's going to hurt the businesses, the companies that employ those people. And so this hurts everybody. I want to tell you the story about Isla. This is Isla. She's 4 years old. She was born in 2021 in a rural part of my district after an uneventful pregnancy. But right after she was delivered, something went very, very wrong. She was in dire straits, was clearly sick, needed emergency care, and thank goodness this rural hospital has a labor and delivery unit, so they were well equipped to resuscitate a baby, to stabilize her, and then to life flight her to a hospital that could provide the specialty care that she needed. Well, let's just think for a moment about if Medicaid gets cut and these rural hospitals see a disproportionate share of Medicaid-dependent patients. either those hospitals are going to close or they're going to start cutting back services. And I will tell you that the first service to go is labor and delivery. So what if that had happened after these Medicaid cuts? What if Kittitas Valley Healthcare didn't have labor and delivery? What if Isla had been born then, had not had the specialists there, had not had the ability to resuscitate there in the delivery room? She would not have made it. And that's what we're going to see when we start, or when they start, cutting away at Medicaid, closing rural hospitals, fewer labor and delivery units. More people will get sicker, they will get poorer. Children like Isla would not make it. And that's what I mean when I say it collapses our whole healthcare system. Our healthcare system, it's like a three-legged stool. One of those legs is Medicaid. And if you start taking that away, the whole system collapses. And that's what we're talking about. Hospital closures, taking away services, long waits in the emergency departments, and a population that is sicker and that needs more care, and that care becomes more expensive. It hurts us all. And that's why I'm so outraged that this is the mechanism that my Republican colleagues want to use to pay for a tax plan that will give gigantic cuts to the wealthiest taxpayers in this country, a la Elon Musk. And that is unconscionable. I wanted to start with that, and I'm really honored to yield time to our Speaker Emerita, Nancy Pelosi, from the great state of California, and I will yield her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to receive time from the distinguished Congresswoman from Washington State. She is a pediatrician. We have all learned a lot about how public policy has a direct impact on the health and well-being of the American people. And when I hear them talk about cutting over $700 billion in Medicaid, and it's just waste, fraud, and abuse, this beautiful child is not waste, fraud, and abuse. I will talk about a little child in my remarks who was not waste, fraud, and abuse. This special order comes together to shine a bright light on the Republican plan to fund tax breaks for billionaires and by making huge cuts to Medicaid. Now, that's what it looks like. But the fact is, they will still, with their tax bill, be adding over nearly $4 trillion to the national debt to cover their tax break for the wealthiest people in our country. This is fiscal engineering to reduce the role of government in the lives of the American people where it is most needed. Where it is most needed. This is Robin Hood in reverse, taking resources from where it is most needed, the people who need it most, and giving it to those who need it less, the billionaires in America. This is shameful, and it is a fraud, and it's a shame. Now, President Johnson reminded the American people when he signed Medicare and Medicaid, he traveled to Independence, Missouri, to be in the presence of President Truman, former President Truman, who had worked on this when he was president, but it came to fruition under President Johnson, and he went there and he signed the bill in the presence of Harry Truman. And he said he said this, he said, President reminded the American people of a shared tradition, never to be indifferent toward despair, never to turn away from helplessness, never to ignore or spurn those who suffer unintended in the land that is bursting with abundance. Indeed, Medicaid saves lives as a pillar of health, security, and justice for tens of millions of Americans. People often think of Medicaid as health care for poor children. That would be justification enough, health care for poor children. But it also is a middle-income benefit for nursing home residents and people needing it for long-term care services. They get that largely through Medicaid. And it is also a benefit for people with disabilities. The Republicans' devastating budget plan would push about 14 million Medicaid recipients off life-saving health care and leave countless vulnerable families exposed to catastrophic medical bills. This is terrible because this is about health and financial health that is being devastated. Working families and children with low-income working families and children with low-income households would face ruinous consequences, as would rural hospitals, as the distinguished Congresswoman has mentioned, families seeking opioid addiction treatment for their loved ones, and middle-class Americans with long-term care needs. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert a statement from the California Medical Association into the record. This is what they have said about this. California Medical Association, Shannon President, issued the following statement regarding House Republicans' proposed care cuts in Medicaid. The latest federal proposal to gut Medicaid is reckless. Physicians and hospitals will be pushed to the brink, forced to close their doors, and unable to continue care for their patients. Because, you know, when this funding leaves those rural hospitals, not only do the Medicaid patients lose, but all of the patients in that rural area lose. That's my injection here. Back to the statement. These would be the largest Medicaid cuts in history and will leave veterans, seniors, the disabled, children, and working families without health care coverage, as the distinguished physician colleague has said, making emergency rooms the only point of care for millions of people. Communities will be devastated, lives will be lost. This is the CMA. Congress must reject these cuts and instead focus on strengthening the safety net that protects us all. Otherwise, at least 13.7 million people will lose health care coverage. Republican attacks on health care impact real people, including little children. My guest at the President's State of the Union address was Elena Hung, mother of Xiomara, a courageous little lobbyist of 11 years old. Xiomara has complex medical needs, including chronic lung disease, chronic kidney disease, and global development delays. She has a tracheostomy. What do you say? How do you say this? Tracheostomy? Tracheostomy. She has a tracheostomy, a ventilator, and she is ventilator and oxygen dependent, and uses a feeding tube. Access to quality, affordable care ensured that Xiomara received the care she needed during the extended hospitalization and can now live at home with her family. And Medicaid has helped Xiomara receive the therapist she needs to catch up with her developmental milestones, including physical therapy, occupational therapy, feeding therapy, and speech therapy. But these very lifelines from Medicaid and more are what Republicans are working to destroy to give a tax cut for billionaires. Democrats are standing strong against the administration's many attacks against family health care. This is just one of them. And with this special order, thank you, Dr. Colleague, we are calling out Republicans to either vote to protect their constituents' health care or vote to take it away. That's the choice. In stark contrast to the president and Republicans in Congress, Democrats will always fight to lower health care costs. We are unified and ready to use every tool to stop this GOP scheme. And we will always work to strengthen pillars of health and financial security in America. That includes Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We will always fight for Medicaid. I just want to go back to that one thing. They're still adding nearly $4 trillion to the national budget to give tax breaks to their wealthy billionaire friends. In the bill that they passed when Trump was president before, I said his name, and the Republicans were in power, when the Republicans passed that bill and the president signed it into law, 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. To the top 1%, adding $2 trillion to the national debt. They're doubling down on that, getting to almost $4 trillion to the national debt, and saying, we got to give all this money to billionaires and call children waste, fraud, and abuse in our Medicaid system. It's really sinful. It's really sad. And it is something that I hope the Republicans will reject. And I hope their constituents will call them, because these Medicaid people are in Republican districts. One of our colleagues in California has, out of all of our constituents, he has nearly 500,000 people on Medicaid, and yet he voted with the Republicans on this. Well, you can be sure he'll be hearing from his constituents, because people know. And I'll close by saying Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. But for public sentiment to prevail, people have to know. And we are making sure that your constituents know, and that they are informing you of their knowledge of what you are doing. Republican reverse Robin Hood. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts about this, and for sharing the story of this beautiful little girl. Thank you. I yield back to you.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker Emerita Pelosi, for your moral clarity and your fiscal pragmatism and painting a clear picture of what is going on right now. I would like to yield. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to Representative Valent from Vermont.
Thank you so much, Representative Schreier. Happy to be here. You know, just this morning, President Trump said that Republicans aren't cutting anything meaningful in their budget. Wow. What a thing to say. What a shocking thing to say when these cuts will hurt so many Americans. I'm having a really hard time understanding how taking away health care from nearly 14 million Americans isn't meaningful. It's not meaningful that rural hospitals across Vermont and across this country are going to be at risk of closing. You know, just today I met with Vermonters from a little town called Coventry, and they're deeply concerned that they are going to lose access to labor and delivery health care at their local hospital. Republicans are so out of touch with the reality of American families right now, and it's shocking to call these cuts not meaningful when their bill will hurt working families. It takes away food and health care from millions and millions of people, their own voters, but yet they are not meaningful cuts. These cuts are certainly meaningful for all the kids and veterans who will go hungry because of this cruel and what I think very cynical bill. And why? Why are my Republican colleagues making the cuts? That's what we all want to know. To give the very wealthy another big tax cut and deliver tax breaks to billionaires and corporations. People who absolutely don't need any more assistance. So taking that money from people who desperately need help and giving away to the people who don't. People who are just struggling to get by are having precious resources taken away from them. And right now across this country, Americans are trying to figure out the math. Are they going to be able to afford groceries for their kids? They're trying to decide whether they can afford to go to the doctor. And while that's happening in real time, my colleagues are spending time demanding more work requirements for Medicaid recipients when we know that almost half of adults on Medicaid are already working. They act like they're not working. They're working. And 27% of those working age adults on Medicaid are disabled. They're doing the best they can here, folks. It couldn't be more obvious that they are just looking to remove more people from the Medicaid rolls in order to have more money to give tax breaks to billionaires and corporations. And it's sick. These are people, real people that we're talking about tonight, in every congressional district who cannot handle these cuts. It's as simple as that. And the reality is Americans can't pay for their rent right now. They can't pay for their groceries. They're too high. Prescription drug prices are too high. And costs for consumers and small businesses are just going to go up because of the asinine tariff regime that we've been dealt. And of course, Americans feel like it's rigged against them, because it is. And that's why we have to be here fighting for them. That's why we have to be here raising the alarm about what is happening in this bill with Medicaid. What Americans want is fairness. What they need is fairness, and we owe them that. And they want and need affordable health care, and we owe them that. And they want and need a fair shot, a better life for their kids, and we owe them that. This bill that cuts Medicaid, it is a statement of values. It shows exactly what and who the Republicans are caring about. And it's not you and your family, and it's not me and mine. It's about propping up billionaires and kicking the rest of us in the teeth while they do it. And I ask you, what kind of leaders take away health care and food from working people so that the wealthy can get even more money? What kind of leaders? Not strong leaders, not leaders of conscience. It's shameful. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Representative Ballin, for that clarity. I so appreciate drawing that distinction that Speaker Emerita Pelosi referred to as reverse Robin Hood. That is exactly what's going on here. Who are you standing up for? We saw with the last Republican 2017 tax cut that the vast majority of that benefit went to the wealthiest, and it did not trickle down to people. People are already having trouble affording rent, home prices, food, and other goods. Putting this kind of financial pressure not just on Medicaid recipients, but on everybody else, because insurance rates and medical costs are going to go higher, only makes that squeeze worse. I am going to yield now 3 minutes to Representative Dakota from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with a warning, no a plea. Rural America is already in crisis. People there die younger, mothers face greater risks giving birth, and hospitals teeter on the edge of collapse. Medicaid is the thin lifeline that fragile systems are using to hold itself together. Cut it, and people will die. At Adventist Health Castle in Kailua, 75% of patients rely on Medicaid and Medicare. They've weathered already the storm of COVID, but with new GOP-led cuts to provider fees, they may be forced to shut down essential services, obstetrics, pediatrics, emergency services, care that literally keeps babies and people alive. But this is not just about one hospital in Hawaii. This is a national crisis. Rural Americans face significantly worse health outcomes and health disparities. In too many rural counties, life expectancy is a decade shorter than that of their urban neighbors. Maternal mortality in rural areas is nearly double that of urban areas, and more than 200 rural hospitals have closed their doors since 2005, and over 450 more are currently at risk of shutting their doors. This isn't hypothetical. It's happening right now. And let's be clear, when these providers and hospitals close their doors, everyone in those communities, including, by the way, some members of Congress and their families, will lose their health care. And it won't bring me or anyone impacted any comfort or peace to say, I told you so. Suma Metla, a pediatric physical therapist and mom, treats kids with complex needs. 40% of her patients are on Medicaid. She told me plainly as she sat in my office today with her 1-year-old Kashi, if these cuts pass, we will not survive past this year. Already, speech therapists and other specialists are shutting their doors in Hawaii and across the country. Her own practice is buried in a 2-week backlog, and one of 2 hospitals that offer similar care, and we only have 2 throughout the state, has a 100-child waiting list right now. Suma has traveled to Lanai to treat children no one else could reach. She tried to keep care going through telehealth, But when Congress let those tools expire, families were left stranded. Or let's talk about the preschool teacher in my district whose son was born weighing less than 2 pounds. 5 months in the NICU, emergency surgeries, feeding tubes, a hospital bill 50 times more than she will make in a single year, covered by Medicaid. That little boy is now 3 years old, full of life and laughter and love, obsessed with music and trucks. He is only alive because Medicaid was there. We cannot forget, my friends, what is at stake. These are not just numbers on a page. They're real lives, real children, real families, and real communities. People like you and me. Slashing Medicaid won't balance the budget. It will close hospital doors. It will rip care from those who need it most. It will end lives. We must not let this happen. Find the courage, have a conscience, vote no. I yield back.
Well, Representative Dakota, thank you for bringing up that particular issue of children in the neonatal intensive care unit where I have worked. And I think about this frequently, that when over 40% of births in this country are covered by Medicaid, I think about what it would mean for a family to be bankrupt for the rest of their lives if they had a premature baby or a special needs baby. And I also think about what would happen if those babies didn't get the right care. Sometimes this is not a matter of life and death, but a matter of life, death, and lifelong disabilities. And that's what a good NICU care will mean and make a difference for with these babies who are relying on Medicaid. I'm now pleased to yield to my colleague, Representative Dissenters from the state of California.
Thank you, and thank you, Doctor. I'm reminded of the first oath you took before you got here, first do no harm, that I wish my Republican colleagues would take that oath, because the harm that this proposal does to the least amongst us in this country is unfathomable, it's cruel, and it's madness from a financial perspective. When everyone is cut off Medicaid, where will they go? They'll go to public hospitals that already are underfunded and trying to serve the least amongst us. So all the stories you've heard, I want to put some numbers and think of multiplying these numbers to the stories you've heard, but particularly for people who are the least amongst us as Americans. There are 78.5 million people enrolled in Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program across America. This is 10% higher than in February 2020, pre-COVID. 1 in 3 people with disabilities, 1 in 3 people with disabilities, 15 million, have Medicaid. Comparatively, 19% of adults without disabilities have Medicaid. These are the people that Republicans and Democrats in the past have tried to protect. Now we are being cruel and dismissive of their needs. 1 in 5 Medicaid enrollees have a disability. 2/3 of Medicaid enrollees do not receive SSI benefits. 10.3 million people would lose Medicaid coverage in the next 10 years if the budget reconciliation bill of the Republicans passes because of its punitive work requirements. Most of these people are already working. In 2022, Medicaid covered 2/3 of all home care spending. 4.5 million people receive Medicaid-covered home care services each year in America. Medicaid cuts, as proposed under the Republican budget, threaten optional benefits the most, including long-term services and supports that help the disabled and the elderly, and home and community-based services that help protect these Americans who need our help. They live with disabilities in their own communities and get the support, love, and affection of those communities and their families. In California alone, almost 15 million Californians are on Medicaid. 1,906,300 Californians on Medicaid have a disability. Of those, 992,000 people are working, age 19 to 65. 1 million people in California with disabilities who get Medicaid are working, and now they're going to be forced to go through a bureaucracy that supposedly the majority wants to make more efficient. That's not efficiencies, that's cruelty to the least amongst us. 68% of California adults on Medicaid have a job. In just my district, which is the 5th wealthiest district in the House, 131,634 people are on Medicaid and are at risk of losing care under the Republican budget. 45,916 of those are children, 19,000 are seniors, 10,000 are people with disabilities, 48,300 adults on Medicaid due to ACA expansion. Mr. Speaker, this is madness. Doctor, colleague, thank you for bringing this to the floor, and thank you for your spirit and your personal testimony to what this will mean to a million of Americans who are the least amongst us.
Well, thank you for your comments and putting this in a very personal way. You know, I'm wondering for people out there watching, if they're thinking, gosh, I wonder, is this really true? I mean, are hospitals really going to close? Are we really going to lose labor and delivery and have to drive hours to get to the nearest hospital to deliver a baby? I mean, in my district, the hospital I talked about earlier is between 2 mountain passes. And if it's snowing, there's really nowhere to go except by life flight. And it's not hyperbole. I have sat with the heads of school-based health clinics and community health centers, with heads of hospitals, with nursing homes. And by the way, these hospitals, we've been referring to rural hospitals, but you know what? There are urban hospitals and suburban hospitals that are also highly dependent or have a very high percentage of Medicaid-dependent patients. And we're already seeing cuts of hundreds of employees in the Seattle area because of these impending cuts to Medicaid. So I want to be just crystal clear. This is absolutely true. We are hearing this across the board, that when Medicaid gets cut, we all lose. We lose our local labor and delivery service. We lose our local emergency room. We lose the ability to be seen quickly in the event of an emergency, because somebody who could have been taken care of by a primary care physician a couple of days earlier with an uncomplicated illness is now in the emergency room ahead of you in line, making you wait when you're having a heart attack, and it was completely preventable by using the leanest, most efficient healthcare service and insurance that we have, called Medicaid. I want to tell you another story. This is the story of Miguel. Now, we talked about Isla before, a little 4-year-old girl. Miguel is at the other end of life. He is a senior. He is a constituent who is dependent on Medicaid. He's actually a 76-year-old widower who lives in Wenatchee, the apple capital of the world. Now, after Miguel's wife passed away, he relied solely on his Social Security check to cover his living expenses. He's a retired orchard worker, and so he worked hard to earn that Social Security, and he spent decades doing physically demanding labor without access to a pension later, and private insurance was never affordable. He still depends on Medicaid to stay in his modest home, receiving regular in-home nursing visits and help with daily tasks like bathing and cooking and managing his medications. And without Medicaid's coverage for home-based care, which, by the way, is far more affordable than nursing home-based care, he gets that home-based care and transportation and care coordination through Medicaid, and without that, he would have no way to attend his checkups, manage his diabetes, and function through the limitations that he suffered because of a stroke. Miguel fears losing access to the services that allow him to live at home with dignity, with independence, in familiar surroundings, and he deserves that. And frankly, that is the most cost-effective way to help Miguel. For seniors like Miguel, Medicaid, it's not optional. It's their lifeline. It's how they keep dignity. It's how they stay at home. And unfortunately, Miguel's fears are not unfounded. The rural hospital that he depends on treats patients who are more likely to be on Medicaid or Medicare. In other words, they have a disproportionate share. And if these patients, those Medicaid patients, lose their health insurance because of this bill, the cost of their care gets absorbed by the hospital. And for hospitals in rural areas that are already struggling, barely keeping their heads above water, this could be the death blow. This will force them to first cut services, and we talked about labor and delivery. We could also talk about mental health services and opioid treatment. Those are often the first to go. This would leave Miguel without access to care. I am not trying to fearmonger or deceive Americans, but this is scary. It is real. I am simply telling you what our community health centers and our hospitals and our nursing homes and our school-based health clinics are telling you, that the Republicans' budget will take health care away, health insurance away from 13.7 million Americans, all while therefore increasing costs for everyone, decreasing access to care, and leaving us all sicker and poorer. Now, we haven't even talked really about the impact on nursing homes and on our seniors. Speaker Emerita Pelosi touched on this, but I also want to be really clear that 3 out of 5 middle-class, working-class Americans in nursing homes depend on Medicaid to pay those bills. We already in Washington state don't have enough nursing homes. In fact, people who should be in nursing homes are now filling hospital beds because there's nowhere else to go. Well, just imagine if more nursing homes close, what that will do to hospitals, what that will do to those patients. But then think about this. I'm in the sandwich generation. If I had a parent who relied on Medicaid to be in a nursing home and could not otherwise afford that, I would need to leave my job to take care of my parents. And that's not what they would want for themselves or for me or for my family. And this is what millions of families out there will go through if these Medicaid cuts happen. I would be honored to yield to Speaker Emerita Pelosi.
Just briefly, I just want to make this further point. You have been so eloquent, and all of us associate ourselves with your remarks and the professional knowledge that you bring, the intellectual resource you are on all of this. I just want to add one thing that is just at the same time as the Republican reverse Robin Hood plan is taking from those who need it most, giving it to those who have the most. They are also taking nearly $300 billion from SNAP. SNAP food, that's for food. Food is medicine. You're going to make people even more sick if the children don't have food. There was one time when Medicaid first began that one of the people who was starting community health centers around the country insisted with the federal government that food be counted out of them as medicine, because it is about health. And children who do not have access to food are the ones who suffer the most. I see that our colleagues have arrived. I'll just say this one thing. People ask me, what is your why? Why did you ever decide to leave home and come to Congress? I have 5 children, and the idea that 1 in 5 children in America goes to sleep hungry at night, lives in poverty and goes to sleep hungry at night, and the greatest country that ever existed in the health history of the world, I just couldn't handle that. So that is what took me from kitchen to Congress to housewife to House Speaker, to feed the children. So this thing, what Matthew said, when I was hungry, you fed me, the Gospel of Matthew, what do we do with that? Just tear it up. This is immoral. It's sinful for us to be taking food out of the mouths of babies to give tax cuts to rich people. But you know what? It isn't about that. They're giving those tax cuts anyway. They're fiscally engineering the shrinking of the compact that we have with the American people, that developed countries have with their constituents. We are behind the rest of them in many of these regards when we have to take food out of the mouths of babies to say that we're going to give a tax cut to the wealthiest, but we just really are taking food out of the mouths of babies because we don't want to feed them. And that's what this is about. $1 trillion, $700 billion or more for Medicaid, $300 billion for SNAP. Reverse Robin Hood, a la Republicans. I yield back. You're here.
Thank you. I so very much appreciate those comments and Speaker Emerita Pelosi's dedication to children in every way. And just to put an even finer point on that, food is medicine. Cutting SNAP benefits not only takes food away from hungry people, it also undermines our economy because those dollars are spent at our local grocery store. But I also have to just mention that food banks, which are the next line of support, are also under threat because DOGE and Elon Musk and Donald Trump have cut the food going to those food banks, leaving shelves barer and leaving food banks having to ration foods. And they canceled the program where local farmers can provide their food to the local food banks, which is the healthiest and local and fresh food. And all of this just adds up once again to hurting people in need in order to fund a tax cut for the billionaires in this country. I'm now going to yield to my colleague, Dr. Kelly Morrison from the state of Minnesota, to give her perspective about Medicaid.
Thank you, Representative Schreier. Mr. Speaker, today I rise alongside my colleagues in the Democratic Doctors Caucus and as the first and only pro-choice OBGYN here in Congress to speak out against the Republicans' disastrous budget proposal and to fight for our families, women, children, and families. For more than 20 years, I've had the honor and privilege of taking care of patients as an OBGYN. And one of the great joys of my job is caring for my patients during their pregnancies and helping them grow their families. I carry my patients and their stories with me, and they inform my work here in Congress. I think about them and all the challenges new parents face during pregnancy and then after they head home with their new baby, recovering from the delivery, adjusting to life with a little one, accessing the care they and their family need, balancing caregiving and work, making ends meet, the cost of raising children in the United States. It's a lot. And I think about all the babies I've delivered whose moms got their health care through Medicaid and how critical that was to help them get off to the best possible start. And it's because of those patients and patients all across the country that I stand here today both incredulous and outraged that the Republican majority in Congress is shoving a budget through that will gut Medicaid, the very health insurance program that covers 40% of all births and insures almost half of all children in our country. As an OBGYN, as a mother, as a member of Congress, as an American, this is unconscionable to me. We already have a maternal health crisis in our country. Let's look at the facts about that maternal health care crisis we face now. And remember, that is before we got Medicaid. In more than half our country, women do not have a place to go to get obstetric care. Among our peer nations, the United States has the highest rate of both maternal and infant deaths. In 2022, there were more than double and sometimes triple the rate of maternal deaths in the United States compared to most other high-income countries. And unacceptable disparities exist. Black and American Indian and Alaska Native women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause compared to white women. And most of these deaths, more than 80%, are preventable. So what is the Republican majority doing to address this unacceptable crisis? Instead of working to find ways to improve women's health and to help moms and babies, they are shoving a budget through that will devastate our nation's maternal health care and decimate many of our hospitals and clinics. It will unequivocally make our nation's maternal health crisis worse. And why in the world are they doing this? Why are they choosing to harm women and children? They're doing it to pay for tax cuts for the ultra wealthiest among us. That is literally why. To make the math work to cut taxes for billionaires. They are choosing to sell out the health of women, moms, new babies, the future of our country to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. Choosing to take health care away for moms and their babies. And let's be clear, this won't just be devastating to the moms and new babies who get their health care coverage through Medicaid. It will be devastating for maternal health care across the country. All of this coming from the party that calls itself pro-life and pro-family. It's hard to imagine a more anti-family policy. So instead of wasting time musing around ridiculous ways to persuade women to have more children, like giving medals for having 6 or more babies, I would like to remind my Republican colleagues that they could start with something real, meaningful, and impactful right now by not gutting the health insurance program that covers almost half of all births and half of all children in our country. The Republican majority needs to make their pro-family rhetoric match their policy, put America's moms and babies first, and stop these proposed cuts to Medicaid. I yield back.
Well, Representative Dr. Morrison, thank you for that perspective from the perspective of an OBGYN who has taken care of pregnant women and new babies and really paints a very clear picture about maternal mortality in this country, what cuts to Medicaid mean for that. You know, it's interesting. All of us in the Doctors Caucus have been talking for years, in fact, for the whole time I've been in Congress, trying to improve Medicaid reimbursement, to make it so that Medicaid reimbursement can match Medicare reimbursement, so more children can have a medical home, about expanding Medicaid care for pregnant women until 1 year postpartum to make sure that they are healthy and plan their pregnancies, and that we can cut down this outrageous incidence of maternal mortality in this country. And now we're just fighting to keep Medicaid. That's the situation we are in now because Republicans want to gut Medicaid and take health insurance away from 13.7 million Americans to pay for a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans. That is just plain wrong. I'd like to talk for a moment about another constituent of mine, paints just a different angle on what it looks like to cut Medicaid. And I will tell you that our phones, they're ringing off the hook. People understand what is going on. They're worried for their health, for the health of their families, for the health of their parents. They get what will happen to their local rural hospital if these go into effect. So I want to tell you about Kathleen, who graciously shared a story about her own mother. Kathleen's mother lived to be 92 years old. She was a widow for 42 of those years and helped care for 5 of her grandchildren. Kathleen's mom, well, she lived through the deprivations of the Great Depression and World War II and was never one to complain. She lived simply. In the last decades of her life, she had a number of serious, complex medical conditions that presented real challenges for her medical team and for her specialists, and of course for her. Medicaid supplemented her traditional Medicare plan in the last years of her life and allowed her to get the medical care that she needed. She was treated with care and with respect. When Kathleen's mom injured herself in a fall, Medicaid covered the rehabilitation facility and later in-home physical therapy and occupational therapy so she could be in her own home. Later, she had a life-threatening event and was hospitalized, and eventually she was well enough to move to an outpatient rehabilitation facility, followed by in-home care. Again, Medicaid was there for her. The care was safe and reliable and appropriate, and it gave tremendous relief to her and to her family. Now, in the last months of her life, Medicaid provided hospice care. The nurses and home health aide and OT and PT and case manager were her guardian angels. They treated her with compassion and dignity. Isn't this the type of treatment and care, the care made possible by Medicaid, that all of us deserve, that all of us want, that we want for our friends and our family and for ourselves? For so many seniors in this country, this type of care is made possible thanks to Medicaid, and it is unfathomable that my Republican colleagues want to deny our seniors the type of comprehensive and compassionate and thoughtful care that Kathleen's mother received. And that sort of brings us full circle to how these cuts to Medicaid, Apple Health in Washington State, something a lot of people out there think, well, I'm not relying on Medicaid, and so maybe it doesn't affect me. And what I want, the message I really want to deliver, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually going to look at the camera to speak directly to the American people, that cuts to Medicaid or to Apple Health, they impact every single person in this country. They impact you if you are the son or daughter or spouse of a senior who needs to be in a nursing home, because nursing homes will close and you will have to leave your job to take care of your ailing parent or spouse. They impact everybody who lives in a rural community or in an urban community where there's a lot of patients who rely on Medicaid insurance, because when Medicaid doesn't pay the bills for those people, the hospital gives away that care for free. And then either they cut services or they close, or more likely, a combination of all these, and your insurance premiums go up because somebody's got to pay, and who's going to make up the difference? Private insurance. That means your insurance rates go up, and they're already high. Everybody hurts from this. Even if you're not paying your own health insurance, I bet you at some point you're going to the emergency room, and those patients who don't have Medicaid, they're now getting sicker, waiting longer, and going and getting their care late in an emergency department. And so if you think the waits are bad now, because hospital beds and ER beds are full of patients in mental health crises, or with fentanyl overdoses, or with nursing home patients who don't have a nursing home to go to, if you think the waits are bad now, just wait till 13.7 million Americans lose their health insurance. We are all impacted. If you live in a rural area, you have private insurance, you're doing fine, but the labor and delivery department closes at that rural hospital, and you maybe have a high-risk pregnancy and need obstetrics care and might have a complication with that delivery, you might have to go live in a more urban area for the month before that delivery just to make sure that you're safe and that your baby is safe. This is something that none of us should have to worry about in the United States of America. This is a prosperous country. We have excellent health care here. And to think that my Republican colleagues want to cut Medicaid, a lifeline for the patients who depend on it and for our entire healthcare system, that they want to cut that the people most in need depend on. Again, we're talking about the elderly, people with disabilities, pregnant women, children. To think that they would cut care for them in order to pay for gigantic tax cuts for billionaires, it's a backwards transfer of money. It is Robin Hood in reverse. It is just plain wrong. And I've explained now, and in addition to being morally bankrupt, it is also fiscally reckless. It's irresponsible. And I just don't understand how this is the plan that my colleagues came up with. Their constituents are going to hurt every bit as much as mine. And statistically, with more rural areas and more vulnerable, already vulnerable rural hospitals, chances are their constituents are going to get hurt even more. I sure hope that people out there are paying attention. Call the people who represent you. Tell them what your fears are. I know people are calling me, And I am standing up here appealing to my Republican colleagues, letting the American people know what is going on right now, why they should be concerned. This is a democracy. Call the people who represent you. Tell them what you think. Tell them what it would mean for you, for your family, for your neighbor. Again, it's 1 out of 3 in Washington state. What would it mean if these largest ever cuts to Medicaid transpired? Here's what's going to happen tonight. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the Rules Committee is going to meet. They're going to craft the rules for this, well, Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, which would be a travesty for the people I represent. They're going to do this at 1 o'clock in the morning when everybody else is asleep. They're not watching. They're not paying attention. They're not watching the nightly news. This is not prime time because I think they're embarrassed about what they're doing, but they're going to do it anyway. They're going to do it for the people who are in the front row at President Trump's inauguration. That's who they're going to do it for. This is not helping their constituents. It's not helping my constituents. America, it's not helping you. It is morally bankrupt, it is fiscally irresponsible, and it's just plain cruel. And so that is why I, along with the rest of the Doctors Caucus, have spent this evening talking about what this means for our patients, for our healthcare system. We understand it on a visceral level because we have lived in and worked in this healthcare system. We have worked in crowded emergency departments, seeing people who, if they had health insurance, wouldn't need to be in the emergency department. We've taken care of patients who didn't have insurance like Medicaid, and so they delayed care, or they didn't pick up a medication because it was too expensive and they didn't have coverage. We've seen these things. Dr. Morrison and I have both seen complicated pregnancies, neonatal resuscitations. These are patients who rely on Medicaid, and we're here saying, as doctors who swore an oath to our patients to protect them, to stand up for them, this is us standing up for our patients, to plead with my Republican colleagues not to cut Medicaid. And I want to let them know, and I want to let my constituents and the American people know, that I will continue to fight every minute to make sure that these cuts don't happen and that we keep this oath to our patients. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair and not to a perceived viewing audience. Does the gentlewoman from Washington have a motion?
I have a motion to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.